Okay, so we've already heard from our current panelists in terms of their disclosures. So if the three of you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves and listing any disclosures that you have. They're already listed up there, but if you could just repeat for the record, that would be great.
Yeah, happy to start. Hi, I'm Michael Pollock, and I'm a full-time employee at ICER Therapeutics.
Hello, my name is Young Freed. I'm a pharmacist and the Vice President of Pharmacy at Health Partners, and I work for Health Partners. That's my financial disclosure.
I'm Alan Eisenberg. I'm a full-time employee of Elm Island.
Okay. All right, so we've got a lot of things, and there's certainly an elephant in the room around pricing. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But what I really want to do is hear from Dustin and also from Kristen, just kind of following on the conversation that Steve sort of started with his comments. What are your thoughts? Certainly heard, I'm not sure how much of that we heard today, but we certainly heard testimony from individual patients expressing as much concern about making sure they have access to these drugs as being worried about the financial implications for themselves and their families of having to pay for them. So I want to hear from you, perspective. What are your thoughts about this? Are you kind of echoing that same sentiment? Do you want to make sure that access is not compromised while pricing negotiations go on? What are your views on it, and what challenges do you see?
So as I started digging into the reports and looking at it, my first initial reaction when I saw the prices, the list prices, I laughed. Just okay. That's the moment reaction to go, well, okay, that's what's there, but my mindset, my personal mindset is I feel really thankful that I got a call back from Northwestern, the expanded access program for enatersen. I had attempted to get into the Partesian study. The neuropathy wasn't bad enough, which is a whole nother conversation about how you can and can't get into trials. But it wasn't bad enough then, but I got the call back. So I'm thankful that I'm receiving that medication now. And deep down, I know we are on the front edge of the technologies. I mean, we talked about these technologies and what we're doing for them. So, up until the moment I came here to Chicago to get my first shots the week of July 30th, I hadn't had a with my boys. I didn't need to. At 15 years old yet, we're just at that tipping point with them. They knew Grandpa died of a bad heart. They knew my hands were bothering me. That was it. We didn't need to talk about the disease and that idea. But now going to get a shot, I need to probably explain it. And so they process it all differently, just like kids do. My third one, who's someday will be my lawyer because he uses words like technically and those types of things. He says, so does that mean I have it? And I go, I don't know. I go, statistically, if I'm looking at the four of you, two of you do. Now, we heard from someone else who said, 3 of the 4 and 18 of the 24. So it's not just a flip of the coin, it is. But here's what I told him, and here's my mindset towards that. I've have more hope now than I did 6 months ago that I won't die of complications due to amyloid. There is still a good chance I could at 42 years old, depending on the progression, depending on where cost is and what it cost me. But I have a lot of certainty that my 4 boys, by the time they may start to experience symptoms, they will not die of complications due to amyloid. So my personal view on me getting access to the drug is, man, I'm going to do everything in my power to do it. Regardless of what that price is, we're going to explore every option possible. But I also take the long-term view to realize 7 months ago, I wasn't planning to live in my 60s. So right, that now I have a hope beyond that. So for me, it's unimaginable right now what that price is and what it will be the first time we have a conversation with my doctor and my insurance company about here's this drug and oh, by the way, you know, you're going to we'll send you 4 at a time to your house at $6,700 a shot. You know, it's strange for me just as someone just you know, working to provide for my family. I look at those boxes and go, huh, that's interesting. I got $40,000 sitting right there. Like it's surreal almost. When it's all said and done, I'm gonna do everything I can to get the drugs regardless of the price. Who wouldn't try to do that? My fear is it becomes the point is at what point do you stop trying to get the drug because of what it costs you to get the drug isn't worth the value it brings in living 10 years or 15 years. And I don't think we're so early in this game. I don't know that. So at this moment, I just sit back and go, just one step forward, not only for me, but for my kids and grandkids.
Okay. Kristen?
Yeah. So I think it's a bit hard to hear, and I understand the perspective of what you were saying. I do think, so our expertise really is in the unmet needs of these patients and the value that these treatments bring to them, not in price. I think the drugs need to be priced in a way that reflects their value, but is not prohibitively unaffordable. It needs to be something to recognize the investment that goes into it, the absolute need for next generation treatments, but it can't be prohibitively unaffordable. And so I do think, with that said, there are a lot of other potential benefits, immeasurable and hidden benefits that do go into the value of these treatments that I don't know how they fit into that modeling that was done and how strongly they could be and I guess impact that cost effectiveness conclusion.
And I appreciate you doing the math, by the way. I mean, I do, because like I said before, it's a long-term game. I don't anticipate either one of the pharmaceutical companies going, well, listen, as soon as we hit this amount of profit, we'll tap out and be done, because we just want to stop there. Like, we need to recover our costs, and as soon as we get cost plus X, hey, we can close the doors and we'll go on to something else, because that's not the nature of business. Business is an infinite game. And so if it's an infinite game, I think you have to extrapolate what that cost should be if you're looking at all of those factors over generations, not just a person's life, but take into account my life, my 4 kids, any grandkids. What does that look like? Where does the pricing land? I think has to land differently than where it does, because no one's going to tap out once they hit a certain amount of money and go, hey, we're good. Okay, we made our money back plus whatever profit all the stakeholders are good with, and then we'll just walk away from it.
And I would just say my concern is that these conclusions can end up limiting access to patients, and that to us is the most important thing, how they get used. And so it would be devastating to this community if patients are restricted to one or both of these treatments based off of unaffordability and pricing. And so that's where we really urge the companies to work with the payers to figure out ways to make sure that any patient who can benefit from these has the opportunity to do so.
Right, and we'll hear whether the access and affordability conundrum and how they're dealing with that challenge as well, or how they plan to deal with the challenge. Muriel, I know I cut you off earlier. I don't know if we've gone too far into a different topic for your comment, Jermaine, but I'd welcome you to make a comment now if you'd like.
Thank you. I can't remember now who made the statement about what the cost would be 6 years from now, but I can speak from the patient's point of view, because I've talked to 5,000 of them. Not all of them are hereditary TTR, maybe about 3,000 were. But, and they're willing to do whatever it takes for the next 6 years, because they know there are other drugs around the corner. Their goal is to make it to the corner so that they can get to those other drugs that will be around the corner. And so what they'll see in the next 6 years, they'll see children graduating, they'll see children getting married, they'll see, weddings and probably funerals too. But the point is they're going to see life happening in the next 6 years. So how can we measure what happens in a year in our lives, let alone 6 years? So I think putting a time limit and saying 6 years is very arbitrary and unfair. I think that the most important thing for us to realize is that, and I don't know how the Orphan Drug Act works, but I know in regular cases you have generic drugs that are allowed to be produced after a certain amount of time. I think when the Orphan Drug Act was enacted, that might have extended the time period when generic drugs can be produced, so that might take longer, 10 years, 15 years, I really don't know. But we do know that drugs will be less expensive for these treatments in a certain time. We also know that there are new drugs on the horizon. I hear about them all the time, and I'm not a doctor or a research scientist, so I know that you're all hearing about all these new drugs that are on the horizon. So we know that things are going to be happening in another 5, 6, 10 years. So if we just put a 6-year time limit on all this and say, okay, let's revisit this in 6 years, I think we're just going to be amazed at what happens. So I think let's use the 6 years as a timeline and say, okay, 6 years. Let's give it 6 years and see what happens.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, you also mentioned earlier that you've heard from some patients who've got this 20% coinsurance who are potentially going to be on the hook for $90,000 a year.
9,000.
Or possibly 90,000. Oh, out of pocket. Okay. 9,000, right. Which is significant.
Of course.
And so that will also be a challenge for patients who want to remain on therapy, potentially.
Right, and we do know that Alnylam, because they've already been approved, has a program. I assume that Ionis is also going to have a program to help these patients. Tafamidis, when it's approved, will also have a program to help these patients. We've seen it with other drugs for multiple myeloma that's passed down to AL amyloidosis, that they all have programs to help. They all want the patients to be on the drugs. So we know that these things are going to happen. We know they're going to get help. But as I mentioned before, there are drug companies that may not qualify. And again, I'm not a drug expert either, but we have HMOs, we have the VA, we have TRICARE. We want to make sure that all of these companies are included in being able to provide health care to all of the patients involved. And Medicaid.
Thank you.
So, but that takes a whole other group of experts, I'm sure.
Okay. Thanks very much. So before we get to some of the, I think I've opened a Pandora's box. So if we could just have a quick comment from you, that'd be great.
Okay, well,
I appreciate it.
I just want to say to you guys, because we were talking about does the drug work or not, and I just wanted to tell you that, I mean, it absolutely does. Not just that I'm here, I mean, I'm better in every way. I mean, the sexual dysfunction is better, which is hard to say, tell everybody, but everything's improved, I mean, a lot, right? So, of course, when you put a low value on there, how do you think I feel? I mean, I stepped out, willing to not live with this, with the liver transplant or whatever, because so I step out and I go through this trial, and there was a lot. I mean, I had a nerve taken out, I got staph infection, I mean, it was a lot to go through on all this stuff, right? But I was willing to do anything, even if the drug killed me. You know, I was willing to do that. So of course we're going to take it personal. That it's low value, because what's your life worth to you guys? I mean, what's it worth to you guys to see your kids, you know, grow up, or to see your grandkids grow up? I mean, it's everything. And I put my life on the line on this, and I was willing to. You know what? I'd jump right into another trial. A lot of people say if they got the placebo, they'd leave. I'd never leave, because you need both groups of people, you know. And I probably would have died if I had placebo. I was willing to take that chance. So I don't know. I just it's such a huge decision, you know, that on our lives that you guys are making. So if you could just remember that, I guess.
And our children's, that
Right.
our oldest son's 48. He's getting very close.
Yeah. Yeah. So to recognize is that the panel votes actually reflected the belief that the drugs do work. The question, and Kristen actually brought this up elegantly as well, is does the value being given to the patient, does the price reflect that value given to the patient?
Right.
And so that is the challenge. Yeah. I appreciate it. Thank you. So before we get back to pricing, because we will, I want to ask Dr. Buxbaum and Dr. Burke, what's your plan for these drugs? How do you plan to use them in clinical practice? So we know the MNIS+7, for example, is not a clinical practice tool necessarily that's used routinely, but what's your expectation for how you'll use these?
Well, it's a good question, and we're working on a position paper with a number of people in the United States. European Union practitioners have addressed it. I grew up with diflunisal, and so I think there is a lot that goes into the answer of how soon can you initiate care, and what impact does that have on the course in someone's life. Clearly, we want to implement care as early as possible. Is it fiscally responsible to do that with agents that at whatever price? And that's a difficult one. So from my point of view, a potential paradigm would be by whatever measures determining that someone needs initiation of care, starting with an oral TTR protein stabilizer. There's some that are available. There's some that are going to undergo testing. And in the event, and so we're talking about early in disease, not someone who's at the tipping point. And if they have a little bit of neurologic deterioration, it's not something that's going to be hugely impactful, but it would inform the addition of other potentially more potent agents. And that's the way I would think about this, but that would really be dependent on having some diagnostics that tell us how soon.
Analysis.
I think one thing that's very clear from these studies, as well as others that have been published in the past with other drugs, is that the best response rate is the number of patients who get a response from these drugs in the patisiran study is 70%. The inotersen study is lower. The tafamidis study is, I think, about the same as inotersen, maybe a little lower. And diflunisal is a little lower yet. We don't know whether it's the same patients who are responding to every one of these drugs. So that we don't know whether even the least effective drug in terms of responses or in randomized controlled trials will actually be a very effective drug in an individual patient. We don't know that. And we'd like to have a way to find out. Now, it's real easy if you have a test that says, hey, I'm going to give the drug for 3 weeks and I can see result X and it's going to cost us $100. That's fine. But when you have a drug where it's not clear result in less than 6 to 9 months and it's $400K a year, it's a different question. So it's very hard to sequentially go through each drug with each patient. So a big need is better prognostics that, in essence, will measure the response to the drug in a relatively short term, and then the ability to extrapolate those to clinical validation. So, for instance, in the patisiran study or inotersen, both of those drugs lower the serum transthyretin level about 80%, between 70 and 80%, which is exactly what the drugs are supposed to do. Yet when you look at the people who respond and who don't respond, at least there are some published data, and there is no real difference, no one-to-one correlation between the lowering of the serum transthyretin level and the clinical response as measured in these studies. There are correlation coefficients that range somewhere between 0.4 and 0.6, but that's not the one-to-one that we would all like. So we're in I think, the profession, a complicated circumstance to answer your question as to how do you go ahead and what do you do first. And what you do first is I don't know. I think John's answer is good. I might do it the same way, and the second is going to do we substitute drugs or add drugs? I think the consensus among most of us is that there's going to be combination therapy. And it's not only going to be on the supply side, which is either by inhibiting synthesis or stabilizing TTR. There are going to be therapies that are directed on the backside, on the effector side, as at the deposits or the toxicity, independent, at least I hope, independent of their effect on diminishing the TTR concentrations that are available to tissues. So I think this is going to be, in fact, with very highly scientific therapies, this is going to be the state of the art.
Yeah. Okay. So, Young, let me turn to you then. You're probably already having conversations with at least one of the manufacturers, the one that is approved, around outcomes-based contracts. But we don't actually, as we've just heard, we don't have a reliable and scalable way to understand who is likely to respond or who is responding to these treatments. So in the face of that, what are your thoughts on how feasible outcomes-based contracts actually seem to be?
In general, outcomes-based contracts haven't panned out. I don't know the specifics of this contract because we haven't talked to the manufacturers, honestly. But we've talked to other manufacturers for other outcomes contracts, and a lot of them are really one-sided. The financial arrangements with the outcomes-based contracts is unfavorable compared to standard rebates. So it's not something that I've seen really good value yet from it. I don't know the specifics about this contract. I think they're having conversation with Harvard Pilgrim, so I can't really talk to it. It sounds interesting. I'm open to exploring it, but I don't really, based on past experience, hold much hope. Okay,
so let's start talking about price then. And I'll start with you, Alan. You've got a drug on the market. Michael's is not there yet. You've talked about, or your company has talked about outcomes-based contracting. There is a published estimate of what the net price is likely to be. Are you expecting that there would be other areas of relief on pricing that haven't been discussed? Net price with any outcomes-based contract considered? Other rebates, other discounts?
So I think, just let me make sure I understand what
Sure.
your question is.
Right.
We published a list price, and then we published a net effective price.
Mm-hmm.
The net effective price, we said, was with mandated government discounts.
Mm-hmm.
And that is quite straightforward. We expect the vast majority of volume to be at centers of excellence, at hospitals which are going to be purchasing at a government mandated discount through 340B or other programs. And so there is a discount that's there. That's straightforward. This does not include other discounts.
I'm sorry, can I? So government discounts, I'm assuming 340B as well?
That's what I said, yes.
Okay. So 340B is something that a lot of hospitals that provide indigent care gets access to. Unfortunately, when we contract with a lot of these health systems, there's a significant markup. So it does, we don't get that as health insurance organizations. We don't generally get that 340B. And so, especially under the medical benefit side, which this drug would be since it's infused. So that is not the price most insurance companies get. We actually have to negotiate very strongly with some of the health systems to get that price reduced, but sometimes it's not significant.
But that's not our markup. That's the health system marking it up to you.
That.
So just to be really clear about who's marking up that drug in that particular case, let's be clear.
Right, but so the net effective price may be something that's realized at the point of sale to the hospital, but that number could then creep up again between the 345 and the 450. It's quite possible. Whether there's additional relief coming from other discounts and rebates, I know you can't any of the details of those. But I think the question is, our analysis of value focused on that effective net price.
Sure.
If that's the best that we're going to see, then I think there is a challenge.
Well, so a couple things. So firstly, let's be clear. Innovation doesn't matter if patients can't get access to the medicine. Okay?
Agreed.
At this point, 10, 11 months ago, prior to our even filing a new drug application with the Food and Drug Administration, we put forward a patient access philosophy that is a global patient access philosophy. Okay. There are 12 different tenets to that. A few of those are, I think, important for this. One, we believe strongly in demonstrating evidence-based, objectively and transparently. That's one of the reasons we are a flagship member of ICER, and we support the work that ICER is doing, the mission that ICER has. Okay. Second, we believe very importantly in establishing responsible pricing that reflects the patients, caregivers, and society. Third, that we are proactively pursuing reimbursement through VBAs, and we can talk a little bit about that, and other means. And that we are committed to growing through continuous innovation, not through arbitrary price increases. And we've been very clear that we are committing ourselves to not raising our price by more than CPI-U. Not CPI medical with medical inflation, but CPI-U, okay? Which means the drug, in effect, that price is in effect fixed, okay? So we've been very clear about that. I think it is hard to find another company that has pre-market, especially in the orphan drug space, gone to payers in advance and talked about doing value-based arrangements. What we announced at the time of approval was that we had reached agreement in principle with commercial payers that cover 76% of covered lives in the United States. Okay, so we have been very actively talking to large payers as well as regional payers around the country. We announced that at the time of approval. So we are very committed to the idea that value-based arrangements do actually, and based upon the very, very positive feedback that we have had from many payers on this front, that they believe engaging with us on a value-based approach is something that is quite positive. So that, I mean, that is sort of value-based. We can talk a little bit more about that. In terms of the price, just the price, we did extensive research. We had discussions with payers to ensure broad access and good value for money. As I said, we are encouraged about the response we got from insurers, and these have real money that they're putting out paying for benefits, and they assess across lots and lots and lots of different drugs and so forth as they develop their benefits. We've considered a number of really key factors in setting our price. The first is, this is the first drug on the market labeled for hATTR amyloidosis polyneuropathy that can halt or reverse, as we heard, polyneuropathy. The second is, this is an ultra-rare disease, and there are 3,000 or fewer patients that have been diagnosed in the United States. We don't expect our drug will be with all 3,000 of them. And it's priced relative to the population. I will say that there are certainly other drugs that are in the ultra-rare disease space, and ours is probably about average if you go and do a survey of ultra-rare disease drugs. I would say that we also looked at, so that's two different factors. The third is our risk and investment. We've raised over $4.1 billion of capital. We have spent over $2.5 billion to try and take this Nobel Prize winning science over a 16-year journey to try and get it to patients, right? And so this is the first drug in a new class of medicines. As was talked about, this is new. Think of a new monoclonal antibody when they first came out, other new classes of medicine. It's a significant investment. We believe a reasonable return on this risk and investment is appropriate. And the last thing is we are investing in the next phase of therapies for patients with hATTR amyloidosis. We're starting a phase 3 clinical trial later this year on our next generation molecule. So we believe that these four things taken into consideration suggest it's reasonable to have the price that we set with the net effective price at $345,000.
Jill.
Is your company pricing this the same or lower than other first world countries?
We've pricing. Our drug was just approved in the last 2 weeks in Europe. And right now we're engaging in Europe. It's country by country by country. We have not announced any pricing in Europe. It was just approved over there. We've started to have a few conversations with governments in Europe, but we've not announced anything.
Do you think, Steve, you want to say something?
Just briefly, I try not to jump in, but so Alan, just one thing that I think will be helpful for the panel also to know going forward, the net price that you quote would include the 340B discount that the payer doesn't see. Probably patient assistance you're calculating as part of that, because we know that SSR looks at that as well. And so our assumption when we take their numbers is that we're also capturing patient assistance. So that also is not seen directly by the insurer. Am I correct so far?
I'm not sure I fully follow you, but it's 345 is effectively what
you are getting, but the middle, I'm saying, unfortunately, we know that there's a middle process here that includes hospitals, PBMs, and what have you. The employees of a self-insured employer or a health plan are paying probably well over $400,000, and the rest is going.
That, Steve.
Okay, but
I can't comment to that. What a health system, if a health system wants to, and not all do, what a health system wants, I can't comment to that, of course.
Okay, I was just saying, the 345 as you calculated it would have taken into consideration all the other middle parts of the system and also your systems programs.
I don't know about the middle markups that you're saying. I think that's sort of an extension. And the patient assistance programs are sort of separate. So I'm not sure I fully follow, but in terms of how you're trying to calculate.
Okay, I'm just asking how you calculated it. Did you take into consideration patient assistance, 340B discounts, and all other fees that might not go back to the employer?
We took into account 340B discounts and other mandated government discounts in that to get to the price that we're selling to entities that are purchasing the drug.
Okay. So one of the things, Alan, you mentioned is that the pricing reflected in part that you're the first market entrant, the first essentially breakthrough therapy for this. It's not a certainty, but it's likely you'll have competition in about a month. So is that going to change your pricing strategy when you have competition?
No, I don't think you could. We're based on the value and the outcomes that are provided for patients, the ability to halt or reverse neuropathic impairment. Mm-hmm. Is what I said. I said we have based our price also on 16 years of R&D and $2.5 billion spent. Mm-hmm. We based it on the ultra-rare nature of the disease, and we based it on the fact that we are taking this revenue and we will put it into, and it will support the development of future therapies for patients with hATTR amyloidosis.
Okay. So I know it was just a back of the envelope calculation, but it sounds like the recouping of that investment will be relatively quick. at these prices. And so while it may be the case that prices this high could fund future R&D efforts, that's certainly not the pattern that we've seen with the industry as a whole in terms of pouring all of that money back into R&D. So why don't I just turn to Michael for a second then. You don't have a drug on the market yet, but your CEO has also been on record as saying that there is interest in coming up with a responsible price from your perspective as well. Is that suggestive of any difference in philosophy from what Alan just said?
Well, just excuse me. First off, as you mentioned, we don't have an approval yet or a label, but from a philosophical point of view, and in terms of how we go about thinking about price, a lot of the similar elements. I mean, essentially, the value of the product is an important determinant here, and the value as we see it, we have a lot of, and I don't want to go back and rehash things, but not the value that ICER has come up with, because we see a lot of, let's say, inconsistencies in the modeling there. But certainly the value, the patient burden, the rarity of the disease, these are all important factors when we're thinking about what the price might be.
Okay. So, sorry, I got to keep reminding myself to look back at the table.
Thanks, Dan. With two therapeutic agents soon to be on the market, then doesn't that open up the possibility that plans can negotiate which one they put on the formulary, setting aside this issue of combined therapy or combination therapy? Doesn't that open up this possibility?
Let's turn that back over to the clinical experts. Do you consider these drugs relatively interchangeable?
The gene silencers or all?
Yeah. Gene silencers.
That's difficult. I mean, for all the reasons that the panel chose not to do direct comparative analysis, I think I would dodge that question for the same reasons. I would ask the panel the question of precedent, and the one precedent that exists is in the European Union and some other countries of a drug by the name of tafamidis that did not, in its polyneuropathy trial, did not meet its co-primary endpoint and was priced at $200,000 a year. Was that taken into consideration in terms of modeling or thought process, or was it just simply not considered?
Well, so tafamidis is approved in Europe, and so its market penetration is dependent upon decisions made by health technology assessment agencies in those countries who would have taken its potential cost effectiveness into direct consideration. In most of those settings, the manufacturer make that cost effectiveness argument. So we don't have the same kind of system here, and so ICER is trying to fill that niche by doing the same sort of analysis.
And can I clarify from ICER that your value, the value of $150,000 per quality, is actually more generous than the European? So when the panelists say that they have an issue with the way ICER is defining value, it's actually more generous than what you would find in Europe. And so I would be really surprised if your drug price in any of the European countries was any $345,000 per year, because it wouldn't be approved, because it doesn't meet a lower value threshold than what you're seeing in this meeting.
Well, it would be approved by the regulator, but not marketing authorization, correct? So our threshold is higher than most other developed countries. It does fall generally within a range of 2 to 3 times GDP per capita, which is the barometer that we use. But there are other European countries with a much lower threshold for acceptance. That is true.
And I just want to make a comment about the question about the possibility that only one of these treatments be covered or made available. We that's really of considerable concern to us. We think these treatments offer very different value propositions to patients, and we really don't think that they can be compared, partly because of differences in the way they were studied, and two, just the number of different things that patients value when considering which treatment might be most appropriate for them. So I think it would be a failure to the patient community if only one of these covered or made available.
Okay. So Young, let me turn back to you then. Not a fan of outcomes-based contracts generally. You mentioned that. Given and in terms of the concerns around making sure that patients who need these therapies have access, what do you think the tools in your toolbox are? First of all, do you think health partners can afford a price of $345,000 a year or something around that? And if not, what other steps can you possibly take to make sure that access is preserved and you're trying to be as fiscally responsible as you can to your own beneficiaries?
So Health Partners is an integrated delivery network. We have health systems, we have doctors as part of our organization, as well as a health plan. So when we take a look at new drugs, we, just like ICER is doing, we take a look at the evidence. The evidence presented seem very clear that there is strong support for its impact on quality of life, and also the NIS. So based on that, I don't think we would not cover it. So I'm pretty sure we would cover it because yes, because we also take a look at evidence. However, I have significant issue with the cost. It is just really inappropriate. As a health plan, we get asked to cover almost every rare condition out there, right? At some point, it's going to be unaffordable for us to do so. And I could see employer groups, they're already asking, can we carve out certain high-cost drugs, gene therapy? So we don't want to get to that point where we have to cover all of these very expensive drugs. I encourage the advocacy groups. You guys seem very organized, very strong. Really push back on the manufacturers to decrease the price. I understand they have great patient assistance program, but wouldn't it be great just to lower the cost up front and not go through all the right? Because some patients don't know of these programs, others do, so there's disparities. So why don't we just decrease the price up front so that everyone could have access to it? And we don't have to go through these debates. I think we need to make sure that we talk about what is an appropriate profit for both the pharmaceutical company as well as health plans and PBMs. We should have an open dialogue about this, and this is not a regular business. This is not retail. This is healthcare.
Thank you. So back to experts for a minute. With some of the discussion we've had around increasing awareness of the condition, with the availability of these drugs and the possibility of maybe additional screening happening, are you expecting that there will be prescribing of these therapies outside of the existing centers of excellence? Will this expand?
I hope so, because it will mean that, in fact, physicians are more aware and more competent at making the diagnosis, because I don't think that these therapies should be used as a shot in the dark. I think that the management of the diseases is relatively specialized. And actually, in this country, we do it a little bit differently in the sense that we have centers of excellence. In Italy, in fact, one expert has educated the whole medical profession in that country so that there's a single system where patients get diagnosed, treated, and managed with a set of protocols and with interchange of locales. But I think, yes, I think there will be more awareness in the community. I think particularly in the neuropathy and the cardiology community. And internal medicine will figure out when to direct these patients to the appropriate specialist. And they will acquire expertise in these drugs as it becomes apparent which drug is the best for which patient.
John, anything to add? Or?
I didn't give you a completely straightforward answer the first time you asked about exactly how these drugs would be used. And we see 25 amyloid patients every week. And that's a lifetime of amyloid for a general, probably a lot more. And so if we have not come to a clear plan, I'm not sure how others will. My concern is that appropriately, these drugs are going to be viewed as a leap forward. And patients reasonably are going to say, I want that drug. I don't want any deterioration. I want the absolute. And so there's going to be of figuring out the path that's most appropriate and fiscally responsible. And I think that's going to be complex, and we're definitely going to have to address it. So it's a conversation that's going to involve not just third-party payer, but I think also the centers that see a lot of amyloid to try and figure this out properly.
Yeah. I want to turn back to pricing for a second because, and acknowledging this may be a little provocative, maybe what I've already said is a little provocative, but so we've heard from both manufacturers as well as others that they felt that our review was premature, that the evidence was still evolving, and so it was premature to try to conduct analyses and draw some conclusions based on the evidence available now. We get this response all the time, and our typical response to that is that people need to make decisions now, so we're trying to support those decisions with whatever information is available. You guys obviously have the same information available to you as we had to us. In fact, you were great collaborators and provided information to us when we asked for it. That helped us in our review. But given that that's the case, and Alan has been on record saying if the drug performs as expected, we should get paid the full price. If it doesn't, then we should not get paid the full price. So is there a possibility here, given the state of the evidence and right now the uncertainty around how to measure performance, of something like coverage with evidence development? Could you potentially agree to a much lower price while evidence is still immature, with the ability to increase that price if further evidence confirms the current benefit or even a higher benefit, or at the very least, to lower your price if future evidence shows that the benefit is not as great?
That is provocative. So I think what you've heard from Dustin and Kristen and the other patients we have here is that there is such desire and need for access to the drug now. We have certainly been, our CEO, our president have both said, but you said that we believe we should be paid in full if the drug works as we expect it to, and we should not be paid the full amount if it doesn't work and the patient progresses on disease. That is exactly the basis and the philosophical sort of undergirding to how and why we have gone to many payers and said, let's talk about doing a value-based arrangement. We did that prior to the drug, in many cases prior to the drug being approved. So I think the entities that have real dollars on the line, payers, they're the ones who are right now real value assessments are the ones that we are talking to directly about this. I don't know that we need a broader policy and so forth in order to arrive at that. The entities who are doing real dollars are actually the ones who are engaging this conversation right now with us about the form of these value-based approaches.
Okay. Michael, let's just hear from Michael first, and then
Sure.
I'll get back to you.
So just what part of the question were you?
Do you have
just
a
in general?
reaction to this idea?
Well, from our perspective, if a payer were to come to us and said, we would like to enter into a value-based contract, we'd certainly have that discussion with them. We haven't, at this point in time, announced anything with any of the payers, but, our philosophy is that we believe in the value of our product, and that if we'd like a value-based contract, then we're happy to do so. But, what we have heard, similar to what Young has said, is that they are problematic, they are challenging. Sometimes it sounds great on paper, but when you go to implement, doing the measurement, making the decisions can be hugely problematic. But fundamentally, if a payer were to come to us and said we would like a value-based contract, we'd certainly enter into that discussion. I think coming back to I thought what you were getting at was the chicken and egg situation, where we were asked for some real solid effectiveness data, which we get if the product gets out into the marketplace. So
that is what I was asking.
Yeah. So it is a chicken and egg, because if we don't get the product into the marketplace and we don't get access to patients in need, then how are we going to generate the data to show you that we are a cost-effective product? So we do need to make sure that happens.
Right. But it's possible to link some sort of agreement to how the real-world evidence is playing out in terms of effectiveness.
Potentially, yeah.
Be...
I mean, that was the discussion that I thought we just had. That if a payer has got the systems in place and the desire to, then we'll have that discussion. But as I said, and I think Young had confirmed that a lot of times it's something that sounds great in theory, but when it comes to putting it into practice, can be quite a challenge.
Yeah. So Young, let's hear from you now. You had something you wanted to say, and I'll also ask you to think about how you might structure, and I'm assuming you're considering some sort of prior authorization set of criteria for something like this, how you would structure that given all you've heard around candidate patients who would be prescribing these drugs, whether there's some sort of a step therapy approach. But you had another comment to make first.
Well, actually, I want to respond to Michael. I would love to have a conversation with you.
Oh, good.
So I think that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll have
that. My comment was actually in response to, Alan, what you said about real dollars, or I think it was something like that. 75% of coverage by organizations you're having conversations with. So I want to differentiate national PBMs or national plans versus regional, like our integrated delivery network. So we have less membership. So some of the risks that these national companies can take is different than the risk of a smaller regional plan or PBM. And the kind of, because of their national size also, the kind of rebates and price concessions that they get is different than what we see on the regional size. And so even though the discussion with these national organizations are going well, potentially they have less risk because of their number of covered membership. So it's a slightly different picture when you talk with a regional plan, regional PBM, because of obviously, right? And then to your question about prior authorization and step therapy, that all has to be considered. Any high-cost drug, any plan, any PBM will have step therapy or prior authorization in place. Now, how easy to make that process for our providers and members, that's where the difference lies. It's a given that this is going to go through prior authorization, right? And that PA step, I don't know what that is now because our P&T has not reviewed this, right? But again, that process of prior authorization has to be easy. And more health plans, PBMs, have to put in place electronic prior authorization or some sort of an integrated EMR EPA, so that whole process is a lot quicker, a lot less burdensome for our physicians and members than it currently is. But,
okay. And I'm certainly not holding you to any of this, but would you consider something like prescribing at centers of excellence to be one reasonable component, or for patients early after diagnosis, treatment with a stabilizer first as a step before treatment with. Are those things you would consider?
Yes.
Not obviously not making a decision at this point.
Yes, we would consider all of that. In regards to Center of Excellence, narrowing delivery access sometimes increases costs because you don't have a lot of negotiating power with those entities. And some of the academic institutions are actually more expensive than others, so that has to be also taken into consideration.
Okay, we've got.
Figuring out. It took me a while to figure out why you guys were doing that. I'm slow, but I will catch up. Observational comment, and then just really, and then a statement. I find it interesting as you talk about 11 months out, you're engaging in patient access, you're having conversations, you're beginning value-based or outcome-based pricing with payers. You've been approved 2 weeks in Europe and you have no strategy or philosophy there. And maybe that's my naivety to know that outcome-based pricing in Europe is different than here. It seems to me that if it's philosophical, it's philosophical. If it's not philosophical, then it's what fits this geographic region versus another. And that's coming out of my naivety. So I don't know. It's just an observation. If it's philosophical, it's philosophical. That it should work here, it should work everywhere. If it's not philosophical, then it's what's best for the market we serve. And the comment about talking to payers who are putting in real dollars, my encouragement to both of you would be to include the patients who are going to be putting in real dollars as well, because we have as much skin in that game. And while a large payer can write off a loss, when a family writes off a loss, it usually ends in bankruptcy. So I would just make sure that you're doing that, especially in a rare disease, an ultra rare disease, where it's not like you've got to get the voices for 100,000 people, right? In a tight-knit community that is well organized, that is unified in voice, having a few people at the table to give their input, I think, is serious weight. So just 2 comments through that.
Can I respond to that just real quick? Let me, 2 things. First, let me take the second one first, which is, A, we've involved patients. We continue to. B, the list price is not something patients face, okay? And so this in addition, we've set up patient access programs that are first, best in category and are for the vast majority of patients who are who get their health insurance, let's say through their employer, they're going to have, in effect, a 0 copay. Okay, we are committed to doing that. Okay, we are not able financially to help patients who are on government programs such as Medicare. Okay, there are other programs through foundations and so on, patients to get access. Okay. I just want to be real clear about, we have made very, very strong commitments to ensure that every patient who needs the drug can get access to it. Going back to Europe, just real clear, we have, of course, we have engagement, I'm sure ICER does as well, in terms of Europe approach and engagement. It's just we've not announced anything, so I can't put anything out there publicly, but we've not announced anything in terms of our pricing. We've certainly gone and talked with governments in these different countries because they each have different healthcare systems, right? And so it's almost a patchwork kind of quilt that you have to go and sort of talk to each of the governments based on each of their own health systems.
And I'm not sure I quite understood the comment about requiring that patients get prescribed through centers of excellence, if that was a potential option. I do think that would ultimately hurt the patient population as well. We know there are a few centers of excellence. I know Muriel recommends everyone to go to the BU, and we do the same. That's not something that every patient can do. We know fatigue, the need to travel to these centers places a significant hardship on patients and their families.
Yeah. Okay, so it's time to wrap up, and so we typically wrap up by first thanking our experts and our patient, payer, and manufacturer representatives for joining us today, and then going around and allowing each of you to make a statement about either your own reflections on the day in general, or possibly the one thing that you hope that this conversation, the analysis, the entire day will do that will help move this particular field forward. You're allowed a semicolon in that sentence, so it can be a little longer. And then we'll, after hearing from you, we'll also get some reflections from the. So Dustin, why don't you start us off?
I think I want to go back to what I said before, is the fact that we're even here to have this conversation is progress, right? For a family that's seen through 4 generations, people dying a terrible death, but living a terrible life near the end of their life. The fact that we're even here, I'm thankful that we can even have this conversation, because 5 years ago, we weren't even able to have these conversations. I think it's a broader discussion about healthcare in this country on how we do. Your point about this is not retail. I think that is so critical for us, for anyone in this field, to really look at yourself and remember why you got here. Whether you're at a nonprofit hospital or a for-profit business, why you got here, right? And so you don't have to look far to see the evils of business anywhere in this country. By the way, especially in the pharma industry, who statistically donate more to charity than any other industry in the country, but continually people think they're the most evil people in the world. So I love the idea that you're having programs where the majority of customers have a 0 copay. I like that idea. I don't know that that's fair either. By the way, let's be honest, I think we all have a burden to carry for this and a responsibility. I wouldn't want it for free, because I could afford to pay some, because I'm blessed enough to have a job that allows me to do that, where others don't, right? So I don't think it should be outcome-based pricing. I think it should become income-based pricing. What could I afford to pay? And if I can do that, then I'm at least knowing I'm contributing my part to the overall. Anyways, thanks for the opportunity. I felt like I was over my head more than not, but I appreciate the chance. And again, seriously, for the work to get us to this point, and the doctors and the researchers, thank you.
Thank you.
So I would just emphasize how much hope treatments have given to patients and their families, and the fact that there are 2 treatments and that they might be able to have the option to decide with their physicians which one is best for them is monumental for this patient group. We think both treatments have really considerable value, and the right outcome, like I stated earlier, would be for companies and payers to work together to find solutions that would enable patients access to both of these.
I'd like to commend Karen, Jeff, Steve, Dan, I think, and the panel. You guys have grappled with a lot of data, from the first report that I saw to present today. It's quite an accomplishment, and we really appreciate you taking the challenge. I look forward to another economic analysis when we better understand or feel more comfortable with the assessments of real drug effect. But it's been pretty clear and consistent that these drugs have a really remarkable impact, and I look forward to the next panel.
First, I'd like to congratulate both the scientific and business part of Alnylam and Ionis, ICER, and the investigators who actually organized and put together the 2 trials about which you're talking all day today. If those had not been well done, you would not have had the basis for a meeting, and you would not have had a basis for really having this very, I think, important discussion that's taken place. I would reiterate that this is not an either-or circumstance. Again, I pointed out before that when you look across all the studies that have been done, and there have now been 4 randomized controlled trials in this disease, that nobody gets 100% response. And no one knows whether the same patients are responsive to all modes of therapy. So I think that has to be taken into consideration in the long run, and we have to find out ways in which we judge what the best drug is for each patient, because we are now in the era of personalized medicine.
Thank you. Michael?
Great. So thank you. Thoughts from me. You know, we heard from patients about how terrible this disease is, and you know, patients have been front and center for us, as Spencer mentioned in his comments, and just want to sort of reiterate something that Alan said, is that, you know, we too don't want financial burden to be a barrier to patients getting access to the drugs, and we similarly have programs that will help patients in need. I think what ICER is doing is you know, a good thing. You know, we need to be able to have situations like this where we hear from all parties involved. We still do have some issues with the approach, and I know that Spencer wanted much more than 5 minutes, but yeah, that's the system you have. And I think what we need just to bear in mind, and Dustin had mentioned this, is that there are also issues with the healthcare system that are factoring into this, and sometimes it's difficult to sort of tease them out and keep them apart, but we need to bear that in mind. And then just lastly, you know, the patients came here. You know, we heard from Dustin, we heard from Dawn, we heard from Chuck, and not only did we hear from Chuck, but Chuck brought his wife Sherelle along as well. So, you know, I think that just helps us all remember this is a disease that goes beyond the patient, and we want to do well by all of them.
I just want to thank ICER for letting me attend, and I really appreciate this forum. I think it's really needed. The U.S. government does not have really evaluate price and effectiveness like other countries. Yeah, I don't understand why. Actually, I do understand why. But I really appreciate that ICER is stepping up to fill that gap. So thank you.
So first, thank you to the patients, the voices. I want to echo what Michael just said to Dustin, Chuck, Don. Thank you very much. Muriel, thank you very much. It was incredibly moving to hear your families' stories to me. And from our vantage, innovation doesn't matter if it doesn't make it to patients. And we're certainly committed to taking all steps through the different things we've talked about here today. We appreciate, Steve, all the work you, Dan, the team that you all have in doing this. We are members and support ICER in your work you do for a reason, because we believe in the mission of providing value. You know, it's getting new therapies to market is a tough, high-risk business. And, you know, if you think about it, 50 years ago, next year was the moon landings. That's a lot of complexity, right? It took another, you know, it's taken 50 years since then to just try and get to therapies that are doing something fundamental in terms of trying to address genes misfiring and causing this terrible disease. And so, you know, it's important that it get there, and it's important that, you know, we continue to the scientific research, and we continue to ensure that the next generation of therapies will get to patients. So we appreciate all the work you're doing, and thank you for the time today.
Okay, let's turn to the panel for 30-second reflections. Try to get people out on time. Greg, would you like to start?
For both RNA interference and antisense technology, these are spectacular technologies. It's important that we remember where they came from. These are ideas that originated within the academic community, at academic institutions, pursued by academic investigators, and initially funded by dollars. So I just wanted to make sure, I don't think we brought that up today, but I just wanted to make sure that we had that as part of the discussion.
Stuart.
I suppose it's acceptable to duplicate other comments about how eloquent and moving the patient voice is today. I think it particularly informed this discussion well, and we'll go away with a much better insight into this disease and its challenges. I do appreciate the innovation that these technologies provide to us and want to do everything we can to support further innovation. I was by hearing, and pardon Dustin, the use of the word someone else said, pricing had something to do with the patient and family burden. I would hope that that's not a factor in pricing. We want to figure out a different way.
Harold.
I also want to thank particularly the patients who are here today, and also the representatives of the companies and others. It's kind of a gut punch to really face some of the issues here. I'm always struck by both the necessity and just the incredible limitations and difficulties of trying to balance all the values in play, not for the patients and the firms, but also for the wider society as we seek to design a healthcare system that is accessible to everybody and that is disciplined and effective and compassionate at the same time. And those values don't always easily align. And I appreciate the seriousness of the conversation.
Well, it's hard to say something without duplicating at this point, but I want to first thank ICER for forcing all of us to have this hard conversation. And I want to highlight hard. It's hard for everyone, including the panel, to have to, even as a judgment, it's really challenging. I also want to thank the experts and want to especially thank the patients for sharing with us the stories, and it was very powerful and really moving. And it's clear that did make a difference in the judgments. I also just want to highlight we all have an obligation to ensure that new innovations make it to the right patients, and it seems like we're all on the same page there. It's how to get that. And then I don't know what is harder, is having no options or having options that not everybody can get to, especially when we're talking about the hereditary disease where parents might realize that their kids may not have access to it. So having this hard conversation is just needed to ensure everybody has access. Thank you.
Don.
This has been a hard day personally for me because we spent the morning talking about prostate cancer and now we're talking about amyloid. I have a high risk myself genetically of cancer, and I have a very strong relationship with a big family that's got the amyloid gene, and it has many different family members who've gone through things like we were talking about today. But and thank you to everyone, especially the are dealing with the problem personally. The amyloid is reminiscent of other similar conversations we've had about other rare diseases, which we do often, especially ultra-rare diseases. And my concern and my hope is that part of our predicament is we don't have better measures of efficacy from a biologic and patient-reported outcomes basis for starters, including predictive models. And it seems like, given that we're in a new age here of information, that we ought to think differently about how researchers and manufacturers and patients should collaborate to make that a lot better, because it is tremendously problematic. Someone said it, that this topic this afternoon, it might have been too early to discuss, but these situations from working with Steve and Dan are always a continuous work in progress, and the best way to start is to have some bright sunlight on this conversation, which I think we did today. So I want to thank everyone for their patience.
Stacy.
So just to echo the others, thank you so much to the patients and to the advocates, and also to the clinical experts for really making a very complicated condition much clearer to those of us who are really new to the area. Thinking about and seeing people's experiences with the drugs was incredibly helpful. I know we always talk about access and cost in the context of thinking about payers, but I think the uninsured are a group that we don't really think as much about, and it's really important here when we think about the work impacts and also threats around pre-existing conditions coverage for such a genetic ability here. And I know that typically patient support programs are usually geared around people with insurance. And so I think just kind of being cognizant that we also need to really think about the uninsured and their access, because that's where the list price hits, right? That's the person who gets hit with a much greater price that we don't even really talk about in this room. So thank you.
Thanks, Stacey. Tim.
So in addition to what's also been said, which I'd like to echo, to hear clear that the panel struggled with it, but felt that there was a net clinical benefit, and then with the cost. And then I listened to Young, and I also think about where I work at a capitated health system, about if these drugs are felt to be are implemented widely at the cost that they are, what are the other compromises for other health care that has to be delivered? And we probably don't allocate resources fairly as it is, and without considering costs, we may not do it justly. And I think that was the real struggle for us. But I hope we can continue to do this. Looks at this as new data comes along that may alter some of the equations we saw.
So I just want to thank everybody in the room and for the thoughtful and challenging discussions that we had today. I think one of the things that I'll do over the next week, and I encourage everybody to do, is on the tension between the data and the stories and the financial impact, and us labeling things like our caregivers as having a burden when they don't. They just love us and they take care of us, and we would do the same for them. But I hope to take what I've seen today and really carry it into my own teaching and my own research for med students and grad students. And I just hope that we all continue to take from today what we can and put it, into the way that we conduct our own research and our own responsibilities as teachers.
Thank you, Eric. So we're at those, and as a final reflection, I'd also like to acknowledge all of the patients and the caregivers who came today, because we know when we do analyses of this topic or any other that we can never, ever, ever fully appreciate the impact that this condition has on your lives, the hope that you feel with the availability of some new treatments. So I think you deserve a round of applause, so let's just do that. But as Eric mentioned, we live in a world of trade-offs, and my longtime employee of ICER's is that the beauty of ICER is not in scientifically solving for all the data or evidentiary issues. As we know, even the best job we can do has warts, and we heard some of those warts today. The beauty of ICER is in having a conversation about those trade-offs with all of us together, because without an organization like ICER, those conversations happen in back rooms, in private, and we have issues to grapple with as a health system, as a society, and to try to make sure that new innovations get to the people who need them at a price the health system can afford. It's a lofty goal, but it's a goal that we're ever striving for, and I hope that everybody appreciates the spirit in which that occurred today. So I also want to thank our external research colleagues and collaborators, the research team at ICER, the program team for setting up this meeting. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you all again so much for coming.